Somewhere in northern Ukraine, there's a city that emptied in a single day and never came back. Not because the danger ended, because it's still happening, just not the way anyone expected. This is Pripyat and the wider Chernobyl exclusion zone surrounding it. On April 26, 1986, reactor number 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant exploded. The city of Pripyat, home to roughly 49,000 people, was evacuated the next day. Residents were told to pack for 3 days. Most of them never came back. Today, the exclusion zone covers more than 2,600 square kilometers, an area larger than the entire country of Luxembourg. 187 small communities inside it remain virtually abandoned to this day. Most people assume the danger has been fading ever since, that the radiation is slowly disappearing year by year, the way everyone assumes radioactive decay works. That assumption is wrong. And what's actually happening in the soil right now is one of the least discussed problems in the entire zone. When the reactor exploded, it scattered several radioactive isotopes across the region, among them plutonium-241. Plutonium-241 has a relatively short half-life, just 14 years, so scientists expected its danger to fade fast. And in one sense, it has. Almost all of the original plutonium-241 has already decayed, but it didn't decay into something safe. It decayed into americium-241, a completely different radioactive element, with a half-life of 432 years. Americium-241 is an intense alpha emitter that also releases gamma rays, and it's highly soluble in groundwater, meaning it can migrate far beyond where it started. The amount of it in the zone's soil is still increasing today. Scientists project it won't even peak until around the year 2060. In other words, 40 years after the disaster, this specific danger isn't fading. It's still climbing. Which raises an uncomfortable question nobody likes to sit with. If the invisible part of Chernobyl is getting worse, not better, what does that mean for the places people still walk through on camera tours today? Walk into the center of Pripyat, and you'll find the city's largest supermarket, a store known locally as the Rainbow. The window frames are long gone. Shopping trolleys still sit scattered across the floor, and rows of freezer cabinets emerge from the dark along the aisles, with signs still hanging from the ceiling naming departments that haven't sold anything in decades. Those freezers used to hold meat and dairy for local families. After the evacuation, the food inside them began to rot, and by 1987, liquidators had to empty every cabinet by hand and bury the contents in deep pits, just to stop disease from spreading through a city that was already uninhabitable. The rusted shells of those same freezers are still sitting in the aisles today. A short distance away, in the nearby village of Kapachi, there's a kindergarten that never reopened. Small beds are still lined up in rows. Children's toys are scattered across the floor exactly where they were dropped. In some rooms, gas masks issued during the evacuation were left behind entirely, sitting on tiny chairs built for 5-year-olds. And surrounding all of it, block after block of Soviet apartment buildings, most 9 stories, some 16. Climb to the roof of one, and you can see the entire dead city spread out beneath you, tower after tower slowly being swallowed by forest, with the massive steel containment structure over Reactor 4 visible on the horizon. Nearly 50,000 people lived here. Today, the population is exactly 0. The scale of the exclusion zone is hard to process from the ground. It stretches across more than 2,600 square kilometers of northern Ukraine, and inside it sit 187 separate villages, most left, standing exactly as they were the day people left. In 2016, 30 years after the disaster, engineers finished one of the largest movable structures ever built. A massive steel arch called the new safe confinement slid into place over the ruined Reactor 4 to seal in what's left of the original core. It's taller than the Statue of Liberty and wide enough to cover a football stadium. But a containment structure only holds in what's already there. It doesn't do anything about the radioactive material already spread across the wider zone, slowly moving through the soil and groundwater, exactly like the Americium-241 we talked about earlier. And that material doesn't always stay put. In April of 2020, wildfires broke out across roughly 20,000 hectares of the exclusion zone. As the fires burned through contaminated forest and soil, radiation monitors recorded a measurable spike in cesium-137 and strontium-90 in the air above the zone, proof that radioactive material trapped in the ground and in dead trees doesn't just sit there forever. It can be released again, decades later, by something as ordinary as a fire. Despite all of this, the exclusion zone isn't entirely empty. A small number of elderly residents, mostly women in their 70s and 80s, quietly moved back into their old homes in the years after the evacuation, choosing radiation exposure over permanent displacement. Ukrainian authorities call them mostly self-settlers. Officially, they're not supposed to be there. Unofficially, they've mostly been left alone, and a handful still remains scattered across the zone today. So what happens now? The plutonium that fell in 1986 has already finished decaying. But what it left behind will keep growing more concentrated for another 3.5 decades, according to current projections. The new safe confinement will need to be maintained, or eventually replaced, for longer than most buildings on Earth are designed to last. And somewhere inside a 2,600 square kilometer forest, a handful of elderly residents are still boiling water in kitchens the rest of the world assumed were emptied for good 40 years ago. Was sealing the reactor really the end of the story? Or is the most dangerous part of Chernobyl the part that's still quietly getting worse, one isotope at a time? If you want to go deeper into the places history left behind, subscribe. There's a lot more still buried out there.